ahead and then share the results? So looks like a good majority of you are community advocates, and then we have some social service staff and some government agency. So we have a good broad view of the community. So thank you all for coming. And now I'm going to turn it over to our amazing presenters today. We have Angeles Mendez, and she is the regional director of Project Protect Food Systems, and she's also the chair.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 second, please. Can everybody see that? Yes, sorry, I can't hear anyone. I'm sorry, I just realized, yes, you can see it. Okay, thanks. All right, so this is just a quick rundown of what we're gonna go over today. I'm gonna start with a little bit about my program. So with the Farm Worker Division, we're statewide. We're part of Colorado Legal Services, a nonprofit. We don't charge for our services. We help low-income individuals throughout the state. The Farm Worker Division provides legal advocacy and representation of Colorado agricultural workers regarding various employment-related issues. So for purposes of today, I'm going to focus on the work that we do with farm workers who are impacted by sexual harassment in the workplace, and other sexual violence in the workplace, and the other type of work that we do regarding sexual harassment and people who are eligible for U visas, and a little bit about labor trafficking and sex trafficking. We'll touch on that a little bit as well. But just to give you an overview of what we do, I wanted to provide that slide generally. And then Colorado Legal Services also has another statewide program. It's the Survivor Services Unit. And I just wanted to flag that for this population. I'm sure you already work with some of the folks in our Survivor Services Unit, but that unit has a human trafficking project and a U visa and VAWA self-petition unit. So for victims of trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking who are not farm workers, their Survivor Services Unit, the trafficking project, works with those individuals. And then for people who are eligible for U visa or VAWA, who are not farm workers or not involved in a work-related crime, are eligible for assistance from that part of the Survivor Services Unit. So I put their phone number in there too, and then just wanted to point out we have 13 offices. Colorado Legal Services has 13 offices across the state that provide traditional legal services assistance to people with, family law, housing, benefits, stuff like that. Okay, but let me get into the reason I'm here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about sexual violence and farm workers in Colorado. When I say farm workers, just so we're all kind of on the same page, I know some different programs have different definitions of farm workers, talking about men and women who work in the fields, the crops, the orchards, the greenhouses, dairies, chicken farms, egg farms, vegetable packing sheds, the mushroom warehouses. What else? Anything involving any agricultural projects, ranches, also sheep ranches, cattle ranches, feedlots. And as in other industries, women tend to be the majority of those who are sexually harassed in the workplace and the farm worker setting, but men are too. The latest statistic that I read from like 2020 was that women make up around 30% of farm workers in the US. So, and as I think, as I mentioned, women tend to be the majority of those who are affected by sexual harassment. There was a 2010 study. I couldn't find a more recent study, but there's a 2010 study in California that you all may have heard about several years ago. That there was a Frontline documentary called Rape in the Fields, and they talked about a study in California that found that 80% of women that were surveyed had been sexually harassed at work. So, and this is farm workers. So it's super pervasive, and as you all may know or may have seen, or as I'm going to talk about, you'll see kind of how that shows in the workplace. And so I know we have a variety of people who are here, not to make this like super legal, like a legal training, but just some of the basics about sexual harassment, sexual violence. So sexual harassment is unwelcome sexual advances, verbal, physical conduct. I'm sorry, I'm always using my hands. I need to put my hands down. Requests for sexual favors, like I said, verbal, physical, any kind of sexual conduct that is severe or pervasive. It's mostly that can be a tangible employment action, or it's severe or pervasive enough to alter an employee's working condition. So it can interfere with the work performance, and it can create an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. Sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination that is unlawful and protected by under Title VII, the federal law, and the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. And like I mentioned, anyone can be a victim or a perpetrator of sexual harassment, male or female. Sexual harassment can be committed by anyone at the workplace. Sorry, it could be the owner, supervisor, coworker, or a third party or customer. So just some of the basics about what we're talking about. And so when I was talking about how pervasive it is with farm workers, I think it's important to talk about why it's so pervasive in the farm worker setting and as opposed to other settings. And so I wanted to just list out some of the vulnerabilities that seem to be unique in the farm worker setting is this heightened level of control. There's a very clear power dynamic. It's very clear in any kind of farm worker work site who has the power, who doesn't, and what that means as far as determining the day, the type of work that you do, the hours you're going to work, whether you're going to come back the next day, the next season. It's very clear from the onset, like who has that power and who doesn't. There's also a heightened level of economic and social dependence. As we've talked about in all kinds of different settings, there's a lot of barriers that farm workers have faced. And I mean, that's probably another presentation talking about exploitation and how low farm worker wages are and how prevalent the abuses of farm workers are in this country. But that obviously does not help this power imbalance when it comes to sexual harassment as well. Isolation, a lot of farm workers tend to be very isolated physically, geographically. Sometimes the housing, they're living right by the farm, or just where they're working, the work can be very isolated away from others, and they don't have a lot of connections. They tend not to have a lot of connections with the community that surrounds them. So whether it's usually more if there's seasonal farm workers who are living there and just working in the fields or in the orchards like during the harvest, but then go into maybe another type of industry during the off season, they tend to have a little bit more access to resources, but there's still a lot of isolation, and that can also be because of language. Most of the farm workers here in Colorado are Spanish speaking. There are also several pockets of areas in Colorado where the farm workers speak different indigenous languages as well, which is very difficult to find interpreters for, as you may have experienced at your work. And then also, if you can imagine, like for you as an advocate trying to access a interpreter, a neutral third party interpreter, imagine how it would be like in the workplace when you're trying to get a message to somebody about something that's happening to you, and you don't have anybody who can interpret for you, which oftentimes is the mayordomo. The lack of knowledge, legal system and resources, and immigration status. So as you probably know, a lot of farm workers are undocumented. There's also a lot of farm workers here in Colorado who come on a visa, on an H-2A visa. That visa is tied to the employer, which means that you can only come You're only authorized to be in the US lawfully and working for that employer. And if that employment situation doesn't work out, you have to go back to your home country, or you lose your lawful status if you leave that job. So the typical scenario, I wanted to include this in here. This is what I see. Obviously, there's all kinds of different scenarios, but what is very common in the cases I'm going to talk about and what I see is that the owner of the farm is white, male, monolingual, English speaking, maybe speaks a little bit of Spanish. It can be family owned or run, not always. And then there's a small community that surrounds it. The supervisors tend to be longtime employees, male, bilingual. They speak English and Spanish. They have their papers, they have their green card, or they're a US citizen, and they're probably the most trusted employee of that farm owner or farm grower. And their role is to maintain the operation and keep labor problems to a minimum. And they're trusted because they've worked so long for this employer. They're trusted to do just that. And then the workers tend to be, like I mentioned, geographically isolated from the community resources. They're undocumented, or their immigration status is tied to their employment. They speak different Spanish or indigenous languages, and they're struggling financially and depend on the supervisor. So as you can see, that scenario just creates a lot of vulnerabilities in itself. Um, so I think, as we all know, I think we all have either heard about or experienced or either from clients or from the TV or social media or whatever with the U2 movement, talked a lot about what sexual harassment is in the workplace and how you've seen it. I think I'm going to talk more specifically what it looks like, or how workers have described it to me in the work setting here in Colorado, like farm workers. And so, I mean, obviously there's this, sexually inappropriate comments, jokes, questions, people using, double meaning, using words with like double meaning. I think probably any vegetable or fruit can be made like sexual, or like can be, used in an inappropriate way if somebody wants to. And I think that happens quite frequently. And then, I mean, we'll talk more about what we've seen as far as unwanted touching and exhibitionism, supervisors showing themselves to workers while they're out on the fields, rubbing up against workers, or coming up behind them when they're bending over, picking the vegetables or weeding. And then also, rape and other types of coercive sexual conduct, and then retaliation. So in all of the cases, most of the cases that I tend to see, seems to be a component of retaliation. So if they don't give in to the sexual advances or go along with the jokes or the treatment, or they complain about it, then there seems to always be a consequence, as far as either they lose their job, they get demoted, they get moved to a different division where they're working less hours, and or they also just get blacklisted in the community, labeled as a troublemaker, and have a hard time finding a job in that industry, in their town. So I was going to start with some of the bigger cases that you may or may not have heard of. There's one of the largest lettuce growers in the US was sued. This is back in 1999, sued by the EEOC after a farm worker woman came forward and talked about how the hiring person forced her to have sex with her, and I think she put in her charge that she had to have sex with him so she could put food on the table, and she was fired after refusing the demands for sex. So that investigation, that based on the charge that she filed, uncovered a large group of women who had also been subject to sexual harassment retaliation, and that case ended in a $1.85 million settlement. EEOC versus Harris Farms is probably one of the bigger, more well-known cases, because that case, I think it was the first jury trial where a farm worker testified about the sexual harassment, sexual abuse that she suffered in the fields. And the jury found in her favor and awarded 900 whatever this says, $900,000 a jury in damages for her, and then $500,000 for attorney's fees. And she had been raped repeatedly by her supervisor at gun and knife point, threatened to kill her and or her husband if she did report it. She when she had talked about it, the supervisor would tell the owner that it was a consensual relationship, and so nothing happened when she after in response to her complaints about what was going on. And I think it wasn't until after the supervisor saw her walking with another man at the work site, and he got like in this jealous rage and like hit that. I think he punched the man. Did he punch? I don't want to say the wrong thing, but that prompted another complaint, and prompted this investigation, and that led to this case. And so unfortunately that supervisor was allowed to retire without punishment, even though a lot of women had come out against him for doing similar types of propositioning for sex, and also forcing them to have sex with them. These are just some other some other sexual harassment cases. I just think it's important to see kind of what happens out there. There's so many cases, like, because of the work that you do, so many more cases like sexual violence, acts of sexual violence are occurring out in the fields. And these are just, that's very small percentage of ones that do get reported. So there's a case in Washington that involved male farm workers who were being touched and sexually harassed by their male supervisor. And that one result ended up in a settlement. And then there was a big case in Florida in 2015 where 5 women came forward, and I think it was the sons of the owner and another supervisor who were sexually harassing those women and including raping the women. And that case ended up in a very big $17 million verdict. And all of those women got fired just for opposing the sexual harassment. So then I'm going to talk about some of the cases here in Colorado that we've done. We have 2 of these cases are down in the San Luis Valley. They involved people who worked in the potato warehouses. Our client was extremely brave, came forward after her supervisor had cornered her when she was clocking out, and trying to force her to kiss him. This happened after him subjecting her to just repeated, like, daily harassment, talking about her body, talking about his body, trying to touch her, trying to just ask her out. She would talk with other women. Unfortunately, some of the other women who worked there for a long time, older women, were like, oh, that's just how he is. And then when this happened, when he tried to kiss her and she was able to get away from him, there was a witness, and she came forward, and she came to us, and we helped her file a complaint with the EEOC. They investigated and found a lot of women that came up with very similar stories about the same supervisor. And so then they were able to, the EEOC and us on behalf of our client, were able to come up with a settlement where we got the potato warehouse to implement new policies and procedures and trainings. And then they paid the women as well. And there was monitoring by the EOC in that case. The other case that occurred in the San Luis Valley, also a potato packing warehouse. It's very similar, involved a supervisor who, again, I should have said this in the first case. This scenario was the supervisor in that case spoke English, Spanish. Our client, she only spoke Spanish. A lot of the women who actually came forward spoke English and Spanish. There were some that were monolingual Spanish speakers, like our client. So like that typical scenario that I was talking about. He'd worked there forever. In that last case, the managers of the potato warehouse and the owner. I think everybody trusted this person like immensely. And and then it was just uncovered in that case and in this case as well that there had been women who had complained about this type of sexual harassment, the inappropriate touching and the jokes, and nothing had happened as a result. So like I said, so this case very similar. A lot of women came forward and joined in the lawsuit. And this also ended up as a settlement. And one thing I wanted to point out from this case was it was unfortunate because the as those of you who are in the San Luis Valley, I'm not sure if anybody is here from the San Luis Valley, but I know there's some programs down there who work with victims of sexual assault and sexual violence. They it's a very small community, right? In the potato warehouses, like everybody who kind of works in potatoes knows each other, and people traditionally go from, to the different warehouses. And some of the women who spoke up in here in this case have had a very hard time getting employment after this because they were labeled as troublemakers. And it was very difficult for them. A couple of them had to move out of the valley as a result of that. So, and then we had another case, just really quickly, I was going to talk about this is a little more recent, involved at Fagerberg Produce. There were two women who came forward, who had been propositioned for sex from their supervisor. And this was a supervisor, again, who spoke English, Spanish. He had he was a lawful resident or a US citizen of the US. He was very well known and trusted by the employer. He was very relied upon for helping workers find housing. This employer provides a lot of housing to its workers. And for years there'd been rumors of him just being really abusive, just abusing his power in a lot of different ways, with men and with women. He There had been a lot of women that talked about how he had sexually harassed them and propositioned them for sex. But so it was kind of well known. We had talked to people for years about this. People knew that this was happening, but it was something you just didn't talk about. You had to put up with because, I mean, this is a big employer in that area, and they provide housing to a lot of their workers, and that person has been known to retaliate and make things very difficult for families. And so when these two women came forward who were Spanish speaking, they actually, what was unique about this case was there was a handful of male workers who had actually tried to stand up for them and had gone to the supervisor and spoke about how or had gone to the owner speaking out about how the supervisor had abused his power with them, but also how he would talk to women and how these two women, exactly how they had witnessed what he would say about them. He would spread rumors about them. He would say that one of them would perform sexual favors for other people, and so got other workers propositioning her, and then making threats about, they're going to tell their husband or they're going to fire their partner because the partner also works at the employer with the employer. But that was unique because those men came forward and they were also retaliated against for coming forward. So that case ended up in a settlement as well, and that employer ended up being required to provide more training, implement policies and procedures that would require somebody other than that supervisor to be the person that you go to. Because I think that was what we found in all of these cases was the person that you were supposed to go to complain about harassment or discrimination was the harasser. And then if the person who was supposed to interpret for you is somebody from the office who was very close friends with that supervisor. And so the women, never really had a sense of, this was something I heard repeatedly, never really had a sense of whether or not how they were conveying what had happened to the owner, like whether that was being conveyed accurately, because it was, how are they going to double check that? And they didn't have like anybody else to go through to interpret. So in most sexual harassment cases, like I said, I'm not going to get into the legalities of it, but I think there needs to be this component for the employer liability. If it's a supervisor, I think it's a little easier to show that the employer knew about it or should have known. But when the company does find out about it, do they exercise reasonable care to prevent and promptly correct the sexual harassment? And like I said, did the manager know or should have known based on the type of work or type of complaints that have come in, or just the prevalence for sexual harassment in farm worker community? The employers should have certain systems set up. We have seen all types of, like I said, sexual harassment where we have in every region. I think in Colorado, as many of you know, the majority of the farm workers are in the northeastern area on the western slope in the San Luis Valley, and then like from Pueblo, probably east, where you have a lot of the field hand laborers. And so every region, I was thinking about this last night, every region, I've had either I've helped somebody, represented somebody in a sexual harassment complaint or case, or I have spoken with workers, um, either confidentially or who have not wanted to take any formal action, but who have talked about sexual harassment. And it's definitely has included male in each region, males who are being sexually harassed by their supervisors, but most predominantly women. There are few cases that do currently that are pending that involve women who have been reported being raped at the workplace who are farm workers. There have been male farm workers who have reported being sexually assaulted by their coworkers in their employee housing that's provided by the employer. There are, I think I guess depending on who you talk to, I think you do come around in certain farms, in the potato warehouses and some of the packing sheds. You have that culture. People are like, oh, that's just the culture. You just have to not be so sensitive, and people are just going to joke like that. And I think there's always that. There's like a handful of people who are dealing with that kind of I guess that culture, and people who are coming in new to the employer and who are looking for some safety or comfort or support and are unable to find it because it's a survival mechanism. It's for whatever reason, like people have found ways to survive. Women have found ways to survive in that area. And it's just not very easy to come forward about the type of when you are feeling violated or harassed and so uncomfortable at work. And so what we obviously, so easy to say this, but so some of the ways that workers can protect their rights is they have to tell their harasser to stop, because like I said, for it to be sexual harassment, it has to be unwanted. You have to make it very clear that you do not want to participate in what they're offering. You make it clear to that person. Gathering evidence, this is another thing we tell people, is especially if they're contemplating, they're not sure they want to come forward. We talk about just trying to keep evidence, preserve texts, phone call records, photos. If the harasser is sending you pictures of themselves or porn or something, like preserving those. Marking on your calendar, like how many times, like, oh, he asked me out again today, putting that on your calendar on the wall. And then obviously reporting the harassment, finding a way to report the harassment to the employer through somebody that you trust, who can either interpret or you could, if you feel comfortable, or a representative, or you can go directly to the employer. There are these different ways that we talk to people. We tell them these ways to protect yourselves: reporting to an agency, talking to us. These are like kind of standard tips that we all give, but the reason Angeles is going to talk more about the work that she does, but the reason that we rely so much on you all is because like I'm in Denver right now, and even though I work throughout the state and I travel a lot and I visit workers at the labor camps and at the housing and I do community outreach events, I still don't have that level of trust or just that relationship with workers that you all tend to do, and that service providers and people on the ground who've been living in the communities and working with farm workers have. And so like I was saying, how it's harder to kind of find that support at the workplace. A lot of the people who've come forward in the cases that we've brought are brought to us by people like you all, people like Angeles, the promotoras, the service providers, people who are workers do feel comfortable going to and talking to about what's happening at the workplace. And so I wanted to share, the background and the prevalence, and talk about all the different scenarios we see, give you a little information about what we tell workers, what they can do. I'm going to go into a little more depth about what happens if somebody does bring a case and what kind of options they have. But I did want to point out, like, none of our cases, none of the work that we do would be possible without the relationships or without the referrals from all of you, and that support for women to feel like they can come forward and make a difference and bring some of these cases that they've done. So when somebody does bring a farm worker, refer a farm worker to us who has experienced sexual harassment, or we will speak with them and provide them information if it's explaining what the law is, what their rights are. If they would like us to represent them in filing a complaint, you have to file a complaint with either the state or federal agency if you want to bring a sexual harassment case. For people who are undocumented, there is a few different options for potential immigration relief. The U visa used to be a lot more of an option, but as some of you may know, it takes like 20 years now, I think, to get a U visa. And so for a lot of women, though, who are sexually harassed in the workplace and report it, and it qualifies as a U visa crime, they can usually get the EOC or CCRD to sign off a certification, so they could apply for a U visa. But like I said, it can take like 20 years to get a U visa now, and maybe they can get work authorization within 5 years. So that can be an option. There's deferred action, which I could talk a little bit more about, which is also something that government agencies can help workers get, which is to help them get work authorization while the investigation is going on. And so that can also happen in sexual harassment cases. So we represent workers in that complaint process, and if there's any kind of immigration relief available to them, we will also represent them in that. If they want to bring a civil case against the harasser or the company, we can represent them in those cases. And if they want to report the sexual harassment or the violence or the criminal act to law enforcement, we can also assist. I mean, obviously there's the victim advocates and the system that's set up to help them as well, but we can also provide that support and making sure that, because usually sometimes there's a civil case and a criminal case going on, it can be very complicated and overwhelming for the victim. So just having more support.
Excuse me,
Also,
Jennifer.
yeah.
We have a question in the chat.
Oh,
It says survivors are very creative. Are there any instances of women who organized a response that is outside of the legal systems?
I'm sure there are. I think, I guess it depends, like, to what level we're talking about. I mean, I've heard like anecdotes and stories. I know that one of the several years ago, we were doing this the bandana project, and we would go out and meet with farm workers, and we'd have a bunch of bandanas and paint markers and everything, and we would go and speak and meet with farm worker women and talk for a couple of hours about sexual harassment, what it is, and then we would, because a lot of farm workers will wear bandanas to protect themselves from the dust and pesticides and and everything else. And but the bandana project, they were using the bandanas like as a symbol, as a shield against sexual harassment. And so we would decorate. So it was more like empowering, raising awareness, talking about, how to protect yourselves and how to build those, like you said, survivors are very creative, and how to build those um, communities, that support you, or just the groups that support you, and how to deal with harassers in the workplace. And so I know I'm hearing in those, when we did those meetings, I would hear a lot of different anecdotes of how some of the women would either work together, or they'd have certain signals or certain things that they would do to kind of keep themselves away from the slimy dude who was harassing everybody. But I'm not sure if you're talking more active, and I can't see the chat, I'm sorry. But I'm sure there are. I just don't know of any that have there been any big actions here against harassers.
Yeah, that, uh, the participant says, nice, thank you. And those anecdotal resources are very valuable.
Yeah, and so that was one thing I wanted to point out is we'll do that too. Like, I think that, and it's easier for us to come in and if you suspect that there's a harassment situation going on at a particular farm, and you could give us a heads up, we'll go out there and we'll do not just outreach to the farm workers, but maybe we'll like focus on kind of sexual harassment, not in a really weird, awkward way, but we'll create certain events that kind of focus on farm worker women, and working with the promotoras, or working with the different other offices there, and trying to just raise awareness, but also try to create that like safe space for people to come forward. We do presentations for workers as well, and trainings like this one. But we sorry. But I wanted to mention we do a lot of work with trafficking, and I think I had started this presentation thinking that I was going to talk a lot about labor trafficking and sex trafficking, and I personally am not saying it's not happening. I haven't had any cases where I've definitely had labor trafficking cases involving farm workers who've been forced to work. And I think I had one case where there was absolutely a sexual component to that for one of the individuals, but I haven't seen that as much in the farm worker setting, like is sex trafficking, as I think the survivor services unit sees in other ways. So not as much tied to the work site of farm workers. So I'm not an expert on that, because I haven't had many cases here in Colorado to see that, well, there were farm workers themselves are being I guess sex trafficking is obviously a form of labor trafficking as well, but I just haven't seen that level of that type of trafficking. So I didn't want to speak about something that I don't have a lot of knowledge about. But like I said, my coworkers, the survivor services unit, who do work with a lot of survivors of sex trafficking, could speak more on that if you were interested in speaking more about sex trafficking. But I know it seems like I was reading where a lot of you are from, it seems like you all have a lot of expertise working with trafficking victims as well. And it's great to see that. I wanted to say, before I hand it over to Angeles, I wanted to say that I wrote down some of your names, some of your information as well, because some of the cases that I've had, it's been very difficult to find resources for them, particularly for a male victim of sexual assault, who had to leave his employment situation because of what happened to him, and he did not feel safe. It was really difficult for me to find in that area, in that particular region. It was hard for me to find anyone who he could speak to about what had happened. I mean, it happened like a week before I got there, and he's like, I can't stay here. And I moved, and there was a safe house who helped to move him. But he was wanting to talk about, you know, the trauma and everything that he was going through, and I was not equipped for that, and he's Spanish speaking, and it was really hard to find somebody locally who, for me, it was really hard to find somebody who I could connect him with. It was over a weekend to talk about what he had gone through. And so I've been trying to build up our resource data bank, and now I think I have a lot more contacts, but it's just really great to be more looped in with you all. But as I said, our work could not be done without the work of you all wonderful people, and without people like Angeles and the coalitions that are out there that focus on providing services to farm workers. And so I'm going to turn it over to Angeles, and I'll shut up. And Angeles, you let me know when you want me to switch the slides.
You can switch to the next slide now. Thank you. The other one. Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Angeles Mendez, and a little bit about me. I come from agricultural parents. My mom's still an agricultural worker, and I am a medical interpreter, community outreach worker, and an advocate for health equity. My background is on healthcare. I always knew I wanted to be in the healthcare industry for very many reasons. I think some of you, especially as Latinos, you know, at such a young age, as soon as you learn English, you are the interpreter for the family, you know, and for your cousins and uncles and everybody else. So I work for Project Protect Food System Workers as a regional director for the Western Slope. And who are we? Well, we advocate for agricultural workers. We connect them to resources in the valley. We do a lot of outreach to a lot of agricultural workers, not just the H2A, but you know, people that live here, people that are part of our community year round, that including the sheep herders. And I'm also this year president or chair for the Western Colorado Migrant and Rural Coalition. It is a nonprofit organization, both of them are. And with the coalition, we do give out scholarships to kids of either agricultural worker kids or children that are whose parents are agricultural workers. We give out 3 scholarships this year, one in each county, Mesa County, Delta County, and Montrose County, in hopes that, you know, those children can come back to our community as we need more bilingual professionals. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, we also do serve a lot of sheep herders in Colorado. I had no idea about the sheep herders until I started working with Jennifer. And I had to get educated myself ASAP. Why? Because as you can see in this picture, there's one of our outreach workers here. His name is Ignacio Alvarado. And he used to be a sheep herder himself. And I believe that the sheep herders are some of the most underserved agricultural workers in Colorado. Why? Because they're by themselves. Sometimes they are in twos, sometimes they are by themselves, literally one person with sheep year round, with no one to talk to but their employer every other week, if so. They don't have breaks to go to church. They don't have breaks to go see their families. They have no breaks. That's all they do. Just take care of the sheep. And they also are one of the most vulnerable workers out there for their employers to abuse them. Not just when it comes to labor, but also puts them at risk for being sexually abused by, who knows? I mean, they're by themselves all the time. And one of the biggest things out there is their mental health. It is such a we always see like with sexual abuse victims, we always want them to, well, why didn't you report it? We want you to report it. We wish you to report it. But you know, the lack and the trauma that they go through, it's so hard that we don't stop and think for a moment, what about their mental health? What's going on right now through their mental health? What's happening? There is such a taboo thing that we're still not recognizing, you know, for any of us. You know, I feel like mental health is still developing, especially when it comes to victims of sexual abuse and labor trafficking. Next slide, please. Like I mentioned before, I serve the H-2A visa workers, the immigrants that are coming here, whether they are, you know, under refugee status or they're just working undocumented. Also, there is a lot of residents here that they do work year round. We have seen in the past, or at least when I first came to Colorado, I was 9 years old. We were seeing a lot of migrant families, children, wives, and husbands coming here, working. And through the years, we have seen a huge decrease of females coming in the area or families coming in the area. Why? I don't know. One of the things that I do personally know, working with a lot of the families that I have known for years, is the fact that, like Jennifer said, there has been a lot of employers and a lot of other workers and a lot of foremen abusing workers, abusing these females. I personally known of a couple of females here in the Western Slope, and they are Cora speakers. And one of the stories that made me cringe, just because my mom used to work for that company, is how the owner used to abuse them in a cornfield. And everybody else will hear them scream, but nobody else could help them. And as a woman, that was just hard for me to hear. And none of those cases were ever reported. Why? Who knows? Maybe because we're in a small community, and as we all know, you all know, in small communities, it's all about who you know and those relationships that you have. Maybe they do report that, but because this person is friends with the sheriff's son, maybe their son-in-law is married to the son of a chief of police. Things like that happen here in a small rural Colorado. That's just the truth. Everybody knows that. And we also see a lot of the local women here that go through, they deal with a lot of sexual abuse, but they refuse to leave their abuser. Why? Because because of the work they do, their codependency of mostly monetary is that they just cannot leave them, and not because they want to be there or they don't know what to do. Because some of these victims, like one of the ladies in a comment says, they're very creative. They have the desire to live that place and start all over and do better. But I think a lot of them come back to their values, or the education they had when they were young. There's also the trust that they have with with the family, and sometimes the family themselves tell them, well, what are you gonna do by yourselves? It's okay if you stay. It's, that's the only bad thing about that person. And it is a very bad thing, but they just don't leave them. And at the same time, it's because, sometimes they are working in the agricultural industry where we all know it's not very well paid, it's seasonal. So they might work really good during the summer, but then here comes the winter and there's no money. So most of these women rely on their abuser for that. And it's even harder when they have children. And it's even harder when your family is like, well, don't leave them, you are Catholic, you're a Christian, or your faith, or what would your family think? So there's also, the lack of support sometimes from family members and people that's supposed to be there to support you. Next slide, please. So some of the effective techniques, and that's pretty much what we need to focus on, because we all know what's happening. Obviously, you guys are dealing with all the time. Some of the effective techniques that I go through is I do as much outreach as possible, professional individual, to keep educating yourself or become a medical interpreter or become an advocate or become, a victim's advocate for the sheriffs. I cannot tell you that, but I can tell you that that's one of the things that work for me. Is I wanted to make a change, and I know that I wanted to be a medical professional. I needed to be a medical interpreter in order to be so much more educated to serve the community that is struggling. We all know that the lack of healthcare access for Latinos is less likely than other Americans to have healthcare insurance and any other care, preventative care, even here. So imagine some of these workers that don't speak the language, going to their doctor. And again, some of the doctors sometimes they don't even know how to spot those scenarios where a woman goes and says, well, I fell from the stairs. But you can see all over her that she's just not dealing with it great, because she really didn't fall from the stairs. She actually has been abused. So there's so many components right here that I wish I could tell you, educate yourself more so you can have more access to many things. But that's one of the things that work for me, is getting educated into becoming a medical interpreter in a community outreach. For that, I had to go through a lot of things. One other thing is Spanish focus groups, working with other nonprofits, takes you a long way. Kind of like you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Right now, I have been working with the Department of Healthcare here in Delta, and we're doing focus groups about mental health. And one of the things that I'm starting to find out is how many people are being abused at home. They are farm workers, some of them, yes, but some of them are just being abused by their loved ones. And they never talked about it. And the only reason they came to be is because they are in a focus groups where obviously nothing needs to come out. We talk about parenting. We talk about, I don't know if I come from a very traditional Spanish or Mexican family where we didn't talk about this. We never talk about sexual harassment. My mom never really talked to me about that. I had to learn it outside. So those are some of the chains that need to be broken even nowadays, where, daughter comes to mom and says, hey, mom, my father or so-and-so, my uncle, touched me inappropriately. It's like, no, you're making things up, or we don't talk about that, or don't tell anybody. Nobody needs to know. It's like those are kind of like the focus groups that we need to start changing. We gotta change. We want to start changing things. Things always start changing with us, right? We start changing things at home. So what is another way to feel at home? Is to feel at home with people that you trust. In this case, is you, the outreach worker, the person that is having those conversations one-on-one with these people. You are their family now. You are the one in charge to maybe help them break those chains. Like I said, outreach as much as possible. That's one of the things that we're doing. Later on, I'm gonna go with Carla to do some outreach. Stay present in their life, stay some as a face that they're always seeing. In case that one of these days they are willing to open up, you are there for them. You already know what to do. You already have the resource, which is Jennifer. You are the one that gets to make that call and be present throughout the time. Sometimes we just make the connection, but we don't really check with them on what happens after. Like, hey, were you able to speak with Jennifer? Did she follow through? Do you need any support? What can I do for you? Celebrate a couple of events. We put together Cinco de Mayo celebration, where we bring all these nonprofit organizations for free, in order for them to reach as many people and as many workers as possible. Another event that we have is a Heritage Day celebration for Festival Agrícola in Olathe. Olathe seems like it's the center for ag workers here in Western Slope. And, we see about, what do you think, like maybe 2,000 or so workers that come to Olathe for this festival. And again, we bring all these nonprofit organizations for free, so they can, do their outreach and present all these information that they have. So again, it's important that you guys are acquainted with one another. There's some of you that I personally don't know. I have never even heard of your organization. So little things like that sometimes personally we struggle going out of our way or the extra mile to bring the care to these workers. Stay informed with the policy changes. For example, the SB 21087 or the Ag Workers Bill of Rights. I was very happy to be part of that. But stay informed. There's more than just one Bill of Rights happening. There's so many things happening right now. You as an outreach worker, you as a community outreach person, you need to stay informed, stay educated, stay active within your community. Don't do just the bare minimum. The bare minimum doesn't change worlds. You're in charge to go the extra mile for that. And accountability, accountability, not just for us, but also for the families that we are serving. We are their boys. We are the ones, I have no problem getting into an argument with someone if I see something that is just being done wrong. Accountability with one another, accountability to say, hey, did you follow through with the worker that I gave you last week? Jennifer, did you contact this person? They told me that you haven't spoken with them. They need resources. Do you know of any resources? It's a responsibility to, like I said again, just to follow through and keep at it. Next slide, please.
Angelo, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. We've got some great things going on in the chat. I'm going to back up a little bit. Candace Abney says that it's extremely difficult for women, regardless of where you're from on the Western Slope. Men who are minorities also see difficulties in the area. People struggle to report much of anything because of lack of response or trust, just like you said. And then Amanda says, very true, victims often get blamed and get re-traumatized from the system that it often doesn't feel worth it to them. It's very sad and frustrating. And Maria offered a story about a nun in South Texas who organized a craft circle so women could come together and make things so they could earn extra money. Slowly, the women started opening up. The group agreed to confidentiality, and the group that used to meet once a week started meeting 2 to 3 times a week. The women supported each other and understood the challenges that they faced in that rural community as they tried to break free from the domestic and sexual violence they were dealing with. Thank you for sharing. And then Jennifer added that, yes, she's heard of some of those same types of groups in Colorado. There was one on the Western Slope years ago. She's not sure if it still exists, and another one in the Arkansas Valley. They are awesome. Candace replied that there is a support group for survivors of sexual traumas and/or human trafficking, and we just enjoy the company and time with people we can trust. It's still in the baby stages, but it's growing. We still struggle getting survivors because people don't want to identify as a victim or survivor. And Maria added, women in a support group figured out that they had been assaulted by the same men. So they gathered pictures, some of them mugshots of a man, and made posters listing the crimes he had been charged with, and placed the posters in women's bathrooms in a 4-county area. Great, great ideas there. Okay, Helissa, sorry for interrupting, but I thought those were great observations.
Yes, they are. And one of the things that they all have in common is you, the ag worker, you that community outreach worker. You are the one that is making all this happening. Why? Because you're present in their life. You're encouraging. All you need is just a spark to start a fire. Some of you have started fires. Continue with that. You know, we often, like I said, we often want people to have the trust, but we gotta earn that trust. We have to be present when it matters the most. You know, maybe they just need information. Maybe they just want to know what time a store closes. Maybe they just need to know, you know, if there's a food bank nearby. You know, just tiny little things go the extra mile. I'm telling you for fact, because I have been doing this work for a while now. And I have to say that I'm feel very, very loved here in the community that I serve. You know, that I have earned their trust, that when I say we're gonna have an event, these people showed up, that I'm there confident, you know, when they're having a struggle, or when their daughters or sons are sick, when they don't know how to pay a bill. I personally always try to give myself 110% on all the work that I do, because it matters to someone. I might not be able to change the world or the entire Western Slope or where we live, but I'm at least changing the life of someone, one person at a time. And I think that you can do the same. It truly is about education and talking to one another, supporting one another. You need the numbers just as much as we need the numbers, right? It's like some of us work by grants, because we don't charge these workers. That's just it. You know, some of us need these grants to continue our work. I know some of you do. And if you need your numbers, we can help you with that. We can help one another. Will you tell me what kind of resources you offer? And I promise you that if I run into someone that is going to need you, I will call you. I will send them your way. But you gotta talk to me. You gotta talk to your other nonprofit organizations. You have to go to the events. If they're inviting you to go do outreach with them, go. It's okay, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I know that you still have to put food on your table. I know that time sometimes doesn't work, doesn't align with your plans. But I think the majority of us are doing this work because we want better. I think the majority of us in this call are women. You know, I see that. I think it's beautiful, you know, that we as women want to change things for the better. We are tired of being victims. We're no longer victims. You know, we gotta help those that are still thinking that they are victims come out to the light, you know, and continue to do something better. Be creative. Like someone earlier in the chat said, they're very creative. They are. They just need a little help. We are it, you know, and there's just not enough of us, unfortunately. There's not enough bilinguals. There's not enough, you know, professionals that they understand or culturally understands where we come from. You know, that's just the Western slope, unfortunately. But it's up to us to bring those resources as well. It's up to us to advocate for them. This is kind of like Fight Club, you know, you can talk about it, but we're gonna have to talk about it to one another. One last thing is we have this data, we have these stories, and we have just many more things in our website with Project Protect Systems.org. So if you want to hear some of the stories narrated by the workers themselves, they are there. Again, the organization that I work for Project Protect Systems, we do rely on grants to continue our work, to keep advocating for these workers. With that coalition, I don't get paid for that. I just do it out of the goodness of my heart. You know, like I said, always going the extra mile. The coalition has allowed me to meet a lot of people, you know, going to a lot of places. Met some people that actually can make changes, make friendships. You know, I met Jennifer through the coalition, and she has been a blessing not just to me but to the entire organization, to the families that I reached to. And again, you know, it's like you guys, you already know what's happening. I we can't tell you that what you already know. I think what you need is responses. And all I can tell you is we are it. We are the ones that have to look for those responses and rely to one another. We, the nonprofit organizations, we, the ones that are doing the outreach. And I'm here to support you as best as I can. I will leave my email in the chat for those that want to continue this conversation, or if you guys need any, you know, support later on. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Angeles, and thank you all for participating. And Jennifer wanted to add a few points, and then we will open up if you want to put your questions in the chat for these amazing presenters who have so much knowledge for us. But Jennifer, if you want to go ahead and ask your questions, or not ask your questions, provide your points that you wanted to add.
Thanks. Yeah, just wanted to follow up what Angeles had said about the Western Slope Coalition that supports farm workers. There's a coalition in each region in the San Luis Valley. There's a similar coalition with a similar mission in the Pueblo and Arkansas Valley, like going out through La Junta. There's a coalition also in that area, and then there's also one in the northeastern area. If you're interested in getting information to join any of those coalitions, if you're in those different areas, or just to attend some of the meetings, they meet monthly, and just to meet the people who are working with farm workers on the ground, so they know about you and the services you provide, and just to tap into some of the events that they have too. I would suggest that. So you could reach out to me or Angeles. We could get you in touch with them. There's also a statewide coalition. It's the Migrant and Rural Coalition, and I'm the chair of that. So if you want to join those meetings, we meet every other month. You could also come to that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, which I forgot earlier, was if somebody wants to report sexual harassment, and they want, that employer to be investigated or that supervisor by the EEOC or CCRD, they have 300 days to do so. 300 days from the event, the event that triggered the protection. And so that could be like a specific, like they were sexually assaulted. And so it could be, 300 days from that day. Or if it's an ongoing sexual harassment situation where like every day they're being propositioned, there was sexual assault, but there's also this ongoing sexual harassment until like then they finally either left or they got fired because they complained or something. That could be the 300 days too. So I just want to let you know the time frame, because sometimes it takes people a long time to come forward about these situations. And so just to put that out there, I can figure out the 300 days. Like I said, sometimes it's past the 300 days, but sometimes if it is an ongoing situation, you can tack it on to the very last event and to cover all of the sexual harassment that went on through the whole employment. And oh, sorry, the last thing was that there's currently at a hog farm, the EOC is investigating sexual harassment claims at a hog farm out in Burlington. And they have written a letter to support anybody who works at that hog farm who doesn't have status, who's worked there since, I believe, June of 2022. I could be wrong on that. Anybody who has worked for that employer, and I don't even know if you have to participate in the investigation, they can apply for deferred action. They can get work authorization. And so the EEOC, because they're trying to encourage people to come forward and to feel safe about coming forward to share anything they know about the sexual harassment, they have put that out there. And so, and if there's anybody here from Burlington, I wanted to throw that out there. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat as well.
Jennifer, there's a message from Carla in the chat. Itzel or Alejandro, can you translate that for me, please?
So I see Carla says that they need a lot of assistance in the rural areas. And then Angeles mentioned that the Western Slope Coalition meets every what Wednesday of the month? It's not every month, Wednesday.
Oh,
Every third.
Is it the,
Yes, sorry, it's every third Wednesday of the month.
Okay.
I think Carla has one more question. Las personas, there we go.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Yeah, so I will put our phone number. People can call us directly, and they should. We all speak Spanish. Everybody who answers our phone, I'll put our number up here. Everybody who answers the phone speaks Spanish. It's all confidential. You can either have them call us directly, or you can get their permission and share their name and phone number with us, and then we can contact them. You can reach us through Facebook, you can reach us through WhatsApp. And like I said, you can also just share some concerns you have in a particular area, and we can do focused or targeted outreach in that area as well. And let me share that screen right now with our information.
And I might add, several people have shared their contact information in the chat if you want to grab any of that as well.
Okay. Oopsie.
And you will all be getting copies of these slides.
So should I write down those contacts or the note,
They'll be getting all of
in the
these.
chat?
Yeah, they'll be getting the PDF of all of this. But the contacts in the chat, you probably won't be. So if any of the attendees want to write down any of those contacts folks have listed in the chat, you go ahead and do so.
Okay, any other questions?
If you want to unmute yourselves, or if you want to put a question in the chat, you can ask it here. And I just put the survey in the chat box. If y'all could fill that out, and it will also come with a copy of the PDF. And then this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in a couple of days. And Jennifer and Angeles, we thank you so much for this important information. This has been wonderful.
Will the Spanish interpretation be uploaded separately in YouTube as well? Or is it just the English version?
That is a very good question, Maria. I believe it will be.
Okay, thank you.
Now, thank you all for everything you do. And again, I mean, we're here for farm workers and to answer questions or referrals. I don't know how many times we've talked to farm worker women who have been victims of abuse. We had a woman who worked at a pig farm who thought that she was a legal permanent resident. She thought she couldn't get her US citizenship without her husband, unless she stayed married to her husband, because he kept telling her that and she had believed him. And so when she finally left that abusive relationship, and she reached out to us, and we helped her apply for her citizenship. There have been, farm worker women who've been eligible for a VAWA or something and have been put in removal proceedings. And thanks to programs like you all, we've been able to go and help those women and get them out of removal proceedings. And so we try to provide any kind of legal services we can for farm workers, within our area of expertise. And if we can't, we'll refer them either to one of our local offices or another social service or legal office. I think, unfortunately, some of our offices aren't as good as others as far as making it clear the scope of people that we help. All victims of domestic violence are eligible for our services, regardless of whether their immigration status. I don't think people make that clear. So any questions about services for farm workers, please let me know. And if we can't help you, we'll get you connected with the office that can. But our main office number on there is 303-866-9366. That's the office that we try to answer. That's the phone number that we try to answer all the time during regular business hours.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we thank you all for attending, and special thank you to Jennifer and Angeles. That this has been wonderful, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you
And-
for the invitation. Thank you,
and
everybody.
Thank you all, and feel free to
Oh.
reach out with any follow-ups.
Let me answer. So Hannah Kaufman asked a question about the CLS offices. Can they work with undocumented folks? So all of the CLS offices, like we all are covered by the same laws. So there's a lot of undocumented work people who are eligible for our services. So if they have a current application pending, if they're a victim of a crime, of a U visa crime, if they're a victim of trafficking, if they're a victim of domestic violence, like I said, their immigration status does not matter. If they're, you know, they have asylum, or if they have like another family member who's petitioned for them, there's a lot of different ways that people can qualify for our services. So I would say, you know, that you should refer them. And if it's somebody who you think should be eligible for our services, but is having a hard time getting our services, let me know, because we're trying to make sure that that isn't happening. Anybody who's eligible for my services is eligible for services at any of our other CLS offices, is what I want to say. So, let me know, if you're having an issue with that, and I could help you out. Thank you for letting me do that. That was just an important point. Because I don't know how that rumor got out there, but yeah, I've talked to a lot of people where they're like, oh, I was gonna refer this woman to you, or these kids that I saw working in the field, but you don't help undocumented people. And I'm like, no, there are many ways that we are able to help undocumented workers. And also at the end of the day, if it's somebody we aren't eligible to help, like we'll find an attorney for them. We'll find somebody who can represent them. So yeah, please still make the referral.
Okay, any more questions? Thank you all again. And have a wonderful week. I think it was great.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
I think
I'm gonna